Good morning, Bitcoiners. The sun is indeed up. Bitcoin running perfectly. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about. Good morning, Kevin. What's up, McTimmy? Doing well. New experiment today with audio. We'll see how it goes. Let me know at the end. Try and do things every day. We'll see if we get there. Two new plans in the short term. So today, tomorrow, and the next day, we're going to try it. Weekends are always a little iffy. The internet, I've noticed, just in general in Barbados, is not great because everyone's home and it just doesn't have the give. So we'll not hold ourselves to the results tomorrow. Today should be good though. Tell me how things are going. We'll see. So, we like to start every episode with the fakest news we could find. Where is it? It looks like the comedy shows last night all got together and talked about Trump, right? Sometimes they do it, right? And Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy's had a kind of a bad week, right? People have been slamming him for reading government talking points, especially about COVID, for all of his bad jokes about the lab leak and about other things. But last night he had a brand new one, right? So here's what it is. Trump yesterday tweeted, "They're not coming for me," right? Because I guess there's no more. I don't know how many active criminal investigations there are on Trump right now, but it's way fewer than there were. Maybe they're done. I'm not sure. But of course, we've been hearing about Trump's legal jeopardy for a long time. The walls are closing in. The walls are closing in, right? Russia. So Jimmy Kimmel yesterday says, they're coming for you. And a bunch of people wrote about it. Huffington Post, Jimmy Kimmel tells Trump what'll happen when he finally gets arrested, right? Finally. He's finally going to get arrested. Okay, so we're waiting. Let's see. Let's see if. Now, I do think Trump is probably the most scrutinized person in American history. I mean, they've had his taxes, they've gone through everything. How many grand juries have been put together for this guy? And it looks like he's doing okay. I don't know, we'll see. But Jimmy Kimmel says the walls are closing in and he's going to be arrested soon. So let's pay attention to that. Jimmy Kimmel. And I guess Jimmy Fallon, the other guy who's, arguably less funny, tried a similar thing yesterday, and it's the same sort of talking points. We talk about it a lot here. So today's show is all about just taking one step back, right? You've heard of this ratchet effect before, right? The ratchet effect that really helped pump the fiat system further. It's the lack of feedback loop, right? Every time the answer seems to be more money, more government. And that's what creates monetary hedonism. I was on FedWatch yesterday with Ansel Linder, and we were talking about monetary hedonism. This is a term that's been discussed for a long time when you get the low interest rates and the high money printing and the kind of world it leads to. And we've been living in monetary hedonism for quite a while now. And the ratchet effect is really what Safadian would say is the lack of feedback loop that comes from the um, interplay, the collusion, let's say, between money printing and government. And that's why, as I say on this show all the time, you ended up listening to unhealthy people tell you about health. Right? That's where the results end up leading. So if we take one step back, right? If we take one step back and we think about all the stuff that happened yesterday in context, we're going to determine if the ratchet effect is really helping whom and where we're at in the whole interplay of World War III, right? Because a lot is happening all of a sudden. And the first thing comes from David Sachs. He reminded us yesterday that there were two articles written in major American newspapers. One was an opinion piece that came out of the New York Times, and the other was from the Spectator. So I guess maybe the Spectator is British. I'm not sure. Or at least it might be. So here's the headline: America is in over its head. Right? Just an opinion, just a guest essay, but it's the beginning of a dialogue about what we're doing in Ukraine, how bamboozled we are, and the typical American lost and complicated stuff. Right? We're pretty good with that. context, right? Americans easily assume that identity. Oh, things are complicated and we can't follow it anymore. We're in over our head, right? That's typical. If you've ever seen The Third Man, there was a whole genre of war movie made after the Second War about the innocent American trying to make their way through labyrinthian complications of the Cold War and implications of World War II. And we were just a bunch of simpletons, so we don't know. So they're embracing that motif here. Here's another one from The Spectator. Is Putin winning? The world order is changing in his favor. And these were both published just yesterday. This one, I think, is a magazine issue, and they say it'll be published tomorrow. So it's not even out in print yet. David Sachs has a frame for this, and he says, I think there's only one way to interpret the about face. The war is not going well for Ukraine, as the media have led us to believe, and now they're trying to backtrack out of the cul-de-sac they led us into. That's him, one person's opinion, right? Here's another, again from David Sachs. Inflation is still not tamed. Rates are up significantly. Earnings are down. The Ukraine war is not going well. We may be on the verge of the Biden collapse. And that's why you've got Yellen going around the world, yelling, she's yelling all around the world. You give us money. We need to give you money. You get money and we get money and everyone gets money. And again, if you think about it from what David Sachs has just said here, that because the actual monetary hedonism machine is broken, right? Interest rates are up, inflation down. We're seeing all kinds of perverted things within our main macroeconomic indicators, yield inversions that are unprecedented because they have to factor in inflation, which hasn't happened in a long time at the scale that it's at. So you get weird yield inversions. So many of the levers of the system that allowed for ratcheting, right, monetary hedonism, already falling apart. So this war machine aspect of it as well is looking like it's teetering, right? Is there a limit to what Americans can give for money? I don't know. I don't know, right? But we're already into the phase where Zelensky is asking for blood, not just treasure, blood now, right? And that's a different game altogether in America. So we'll see. But if you ask me, I see the momentum really spinning away from the previous regime and the previous way of thinking. And I see, if you take one step back and forget about the massive loss of life that's happened in the past few days, even in Ukraine, and you say, well, how much longer can this go on, right? I don't know the answer to it. I don't know. But I feel like momentum, right? And David Sachs is saying the same thing. So are they on the brink of collapse? I don't know if it's the brink of collapse, but things are changing, right? I don't think the information laundering systems to pump people up are where they're at. I bet you, we've heard Biden talk about all the Ukrainian flags across America. You see them across Canada too. I live in both countries, see them everywhere. Weirdly, this is a strange coincidence. So my kids have a karate teacher here, and as you know, a small island like Barbados, they really in an overrepresented way participate in international Olympics and all that kind of stuff, right? International sports, because I know a lot of Olympians here, for example, right? You can make the sailing team, the swimming team, and there's not 300,000 citizens on this island. So the pool to draw from to make the Olympics are a lot lower. I mean, these people usually don't win medals, but they participate. So I've met not millions, I've met a lot of Olympians here, right? It's pretty regular. My neighbor's an Olympian, all kinds of people. Weirdly, their karate teacher was an international judo guy and has been to the Olympics and represents Barbados and all these things. His wife is Ukrainian. He met her in that whole international world of martial arts and all that stuff. And she herself was an Olympian. And he actually had to evacuate her. She was back visiting and he had to evacuate her last year while I was here. And he was our teacher. And I'd hear all the stories. Oh, she's now in Estonia and she's here. So she arrived she arrived last year, but I was chatting with her the other day when the kids were doing their karate lesson. And I realized suddenly that the Ukrainian flag and the Bajan flag, we say Barbados as Bajan, right? That's the way they refer to themselves. The Bajan flag and the Ukrainian flag are the same flag. It's the same colors. It's different orientation, but it's got the blue and the yellow. And then both of them have the trident. Both of them have the trident, right? The Ukrainian doesn't always put the golden trident in it. in Barbados, it's a black trident, broken black trident, but it's the same flag, because she was wearing her uniform, like a T-shirt or something she'd gotten from Ukraine, and I was seeing it from across the lawn where they were practicing. I said, "Is that Ukrainian?" And I suddenly realized it's the same flag. It's the same flag, right? So somehow the simulation is just reusing national colors for my benefit, I'm going to say. But I live in a weird situation here where all the Ukrainian colors are around me all the time. It's the Ukrainian flag writ large. But Biden has been talking a lot about this Ukrainian flag. He mentioned it while he was in Ukraine. Oh, the amount we've seen. I bet you it's fewer. Right? I'm just saying. I bet it's fewer than it was a year ago, and I bet you some people have taken down the Ukrainian flags. I'm not sure. You still see them all over Twitter, so I'd say that coefficient is still pretty high. But I'd say American appetite for the war is lessening. That's just one man's opinion, but I think I'm right. So war, right? Is the feedback loop breaking, or is the feedback loop not creating that ratchet effect? Is it not creating excuses for more government? I've never heard so much opposition to NATO expansion as I do now. Maybe it's because I'm in an echo chamber. Maybe it's because I'm part of a group of people who would like to see peace discussed a lot more, and it isn't. And one of the factors towards peace would be to limit NATO. But that's what I see. So take a step back. I see less enthusiasm for the war over there. I see the actual battleground changing as far as American appetite for it, and I think the actual ratcheting and the ability to make excuses to grow government, grow involvement, grow participation in this war as diminishing. Right? So that's good news. Still a ways to go, but good news. The next one that is mass from Geneviève Roch, who regularly appears on financials, and you'll see her Twitter threads pretty regularly out on Twitter if you follow her, GR Dector. And she did a big one yesterday on ESG. Why did she do one on ESG? Well, it turns out that Vanguard has pulled out of the whole ESG scam machine, right? We've been talking about the death of ESG on this show since the spring, since the autumn. We've predicted ESG will become a punchline, will become a joke, is not serious. We've seen now potentially Biden have to enter with his first ESG, or his first veto of his presidency related to ESG, in order to make sure Wall Street could implement ESG across the board. And we've seen both the House and the Senate now in the United States ban ESG from what Gensler and the SEC is trying to promote, right? Which we have argued many times on the show is absolute corruption, right? The corruption being if you can get excuses to pay for financial advisors and wealth managers, all the better for that collusive industry. And it goes against what the Warren Buffetts have been saying, buy the index. It goes against what a lot of people in Bitcoin say, is that we need to lower the IQ to participate in the financial system. We have to make saving easy again, right? Saving can't be just for folks who are, super well endowed IQ wise, great education, and also aware of computer science, right? We're against the even ratcheting it up of what crypto offers for the financial system, which is not just a Series 7 license to participate in Wall Street, but also node running capacity and an understanding of miner extracted value and how to front run on nodes and all the kind of stuff they think is normal, right? They think it's normal, like a bunch of Wall Street sharks just competing over a carry-on. So ESG, what she goes on to say here is, is it a scam? Well, here's what Vanguard did. So we've had what I mentioned just this week in the Senate and U.S. Congress. Maybe there'll be a veto, maybe not. We don't know. But Vanguard CEO says scam, and he pulled $7 trillion in assets from the Climate Coalition over a year ago, when the Canadian trucker thing was going on. I did a version of the Breakup, where I discussed Mark Carney, who was the former Carney clown. Right? The simulation always loves us with these ones, that Mark Carney would be the leader of this clown circus. So Mark Carney, I knew him in real life from when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. He went on to be the governor of the Bank of England, and the guy who runs the BIS, that Swiss bank we talk about here very regularly. And his swan song is, well, some people say he's going to go and run for Trudeau's seat if Trudeau can't maintain popularity. He was the first person in Canada to call for what he said was simple. If the protests are going on, just follow the money and take all the money. Just use the banks, deputize the banks to go get them, right? And this incensed me. I was super angry, obviously, that this moron would go on about talking that way about Canada and would literally throw out our banking sector because now it's not a credible banking system in Canada. It's a banana republic. I can't imagine any wealthy person after what we saw with the trucker protests ever participating in the Canadian banking system ever again. Right? A complete scam. And total insecurity of property after what we heard Mark Carney say. So Mark Carney, I predicted when his swan song, forget about the Canadian thing, was to go and run this climate fund, right? He ran the COPA 27, 28, or whatever it's called, climate fund. At first, they had about $150 trillion allocated for their scams. And that was when it was just some conference and people meeting and pledging money and blah, blah, blah over a year ago. So I made the prediction last year during the Canadian truckers thing that Mark Carney would become the greatest financial loser in the history of the world. Because he started with 150 trillion pledged, right? 150 trillion pledged. You better make some money if you get that kind of cash into your fund, right? So it's already gone way down, and now he loses another $7 trillion this week. $7 trillion, right? What kind of a loser loses $7 trillion? Mark Carney's the kind. Carney Clown Show, right? So that's great. It doesn't end there, though. Here's what we know, right? Here's what's going on. It became a trend, people said, right? And that's where all the AUM, the assets under management, would go to ESG through 2019. But of course, tons of people have questions, right? And people have been criticizing it for a while. Elon Musk has called it a scam, right? And everything that happened with SBF, if you remember, right? He was always signaling the shibboleths, he called them. ESG this and ESG that. He had a better ESG rating at FTX than like anyone in the history of the world, right? Because he bought it. Here's what Genevieve says. ESG fund managers and companies have been accused of greenwashing, basically doing one good thing for the environment and blasting out ESG PR messages to hopefully cover up all their net negative environmental activities. And with all of this going on, the Vanguard CEO withdrew 59 trillion from the ESG investing license. I don't know why I should change the number here. With the investing world waking up to this, Vanguard CEO withdrew from he withdrew from the 59 trillion. So it was already 59 trillion, but it was 150 trillion a year ago. So it's already coming down pretty quick. So Mark Carney probably has already lost more money in the fund than anyone has ever lost. So I think my prediction is already true. He is the biggest financial loser of all time. But he's got a room to go here. If they're only down to 50 trillion, he still has 50 trillion to lose. I think he loses it all. I think the fund goes to zero. Trump has come out and discussed what a scam it is. Here's Trump on ESG. you gotta love Trump's writing. We can never forget what a great writer he is, right? Forget the politics and the craziness and everything for a second, right? He's a good writer. Here's what he says. These poorly performing woke financial scams are radical left garbage that would never be funded on their own and certainly never be funded on their own merits. The entire ESG scheme is designed to funnel your retirement money to the maniacs and the radical left. Come on, guys. That's pretty good writing. It's spicy, right? I don't know where just the active language. Everything Trump writes always feels filled with energy and contention and humor, right? The maniacs on the radical left. You can't teach this stuff, right? You can't teach it. It's just too good. So she says, Genevieve Rockdector says there is a souring mood on ESG and more than a decade of people talking about this, that there's very little edge in ESG investing, and it looks like it might be done, right? And we had yesterday Greta, right? She's still not happy at all. And she got arrested again in another one of these 2 days ago. Now what she's protesting is, it looks like the news there is that she's protesting now wind farms, right? But little farms were the best. Right? Remember, she went on about them being the best, right? Farms, we need sustainable stuff. But it turns out that it's being built on the traditional lands of indigenous reindeer herders. And that won't do, right? So she got arrested going with the reindeer herders because they got to move it somewhere else, right? So I don't know. We'll see if she's happy now. I don't know. There's a lot of birds dying. I haven't heard her talk too much about the birds dying from the wind farms. We got a major whale problem. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but a bunch of whales have been washing up on the shores of the eastern United States. And some people say it's from the wind farms that we've put out there. And the best part of all of it, though, is that everyone who's been fighting for closing Indian Point, the nuclear energy facility that New England relied on for many years, well, what ended up happening? They closed that down because danger, renewables, we need solar and all that stuff. Well, it's all been replaced with carbon, and it's all been replaced with coal. And so the actual carbon emissions that New York City has been producing are up 30% this year, right? 30%. So it looks like their stuff didn't work out, right? Leading to the shutdown, legislators and anti-nuclear groups indicated it wouldn't entirely be replaced by natural gas, but numbers don't lie. Nuclear generation as a mix of total generation is down 40%, and these other systems are way, way up. So, but there's been good news on that. Did anyone see this? AOC, right? Did anyone see AOC had a series of tweets the other day about nuclear energy? She just visited Japan. And as I mentioned with the Sendai, the Daiichi, the Fukushima power plant, she talked about new ways that this can be made safe and not dangerous, right? It looks like she learned. She went to France and learned about what France does with their byproducts, with their waste, their spent fuel, how they reuse it. And she's starting to look like a big bullish proponent of nuclear energy. And just her on the board as a nuclear energy proponent would be amazing. It would be a big win, right? Because the whole problem that we have with the solitudes that we've created with social media, the fighting, people divided amongst each other on almost everything, is that it's very hard to communicate across into different camps. But when you get someone who does one of these crossovers and surprises people, and AOC in this case has surprised a lot of people, it actually resonates, right? Her punches land, her efforts work because she has a group of people who are captive to what she has to say. And I'd say her sway on this is even bigger than Greta's at this point, right? Greta won't even talk about nuclear energy. Greta's a bit dumb, right? She's not that smart. But AOC, on the other hand, looks like she's learned on the fly. It looks like she's capable of pushing an agenda that isn't necessarily been prescribed to her. It doesn't look like she's being managed to the same extent that that Greta is. And with AOC on board, I think things do change, right? I think things do change. Let's gift AOC a Swan Bitcoin wallet. Yeah. Can't wait for the AOC freak out in Congress about nuclear. But this is what I'm saying, P-Man Van. I think she's on board. I think she's on board. And if she is indeed on board, it's a win. We have to take that as a win. I am very open and receptive to AOC becoming a proponent of nuclear energy. And so there we go, right? Energy, ESG thing falling apart, people starting to become much more energy literate. The Germans have to become more energy literate, right? They've just completely screwed the pooch here. Everything's going wrong. They're paying so much money. They're moving fast. They're mitigating problems, but it doesn't look like they're going to be over anytime soon. The French, on the other hand, right, besides its union problems and labor problems, does have the capacity to keep moving forward, doesn't have to change things too much, and is going to continue to build way more nuclear reactors than now. Right? They have a plan to build small modular nuclear reactors that can be shipped, that can be that can all that kind of stuff can happen, right? P-Man Van says, "Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised. Yeah, I won't say I'm surprised about AOC. I've had pretty good, in the same way that what I just mentioned about Trump, you can't teach some of that stuff, right? She's got a really good instinctive connection with her audience, and people love what she has to say. And I've seen talent there for a long time. I disagree with everything that she has to say, and she is slightly managed. We've seen some people have an effect on what she has to say, but I've held out hope that she would have some of her own thoughts, some of her own motivations, some of her own intellectual curiosity that would help propel things forward. And I might be right. I might be right. So not too surprised. Next, so we've got the war machine having trouble ratchet up, right? Feed different ways. It's not just the fiat system anymore. We're starting to see a lot more discussion around it. Energy is the same. It doesn't have this captive Wall Street ratchet monetary hedonism thing. This is not going to be, ESG is not going to be another cash cow for the Mark Carneys and the other clown world people out there. It looks like it's going to fizzle out. It looks like the Warren Buffett idea, the Bitcoin idea of lowering the IQ to participate, making things simpler, making saving simpler, making investing simpler, looks like it can win. Looks like it can win. The president might veto it. We don't know. But at least the conversation is shifting in such a way that the ratchet feedback loop is not looking like it's going to benefit banks and the fiat system as much as it might have looked just a year ago. The next, health, right? Health. So yesterday, this was really cool. You had Russell Brand, who went on Joe Rogan, right? So Russell Brand on Joe Rogan. And these are probably two of the clearest thinking, most outspoken, most influential podcasters in the world right now. So to see them come together for a show was really cool. And they covered lots of fun stuff, a lot about health. So one of the best things they covered was, again, this is a Joe Rogan special, a Joe Rogan personal thing. But remember all the criticism Joe Rogan got about being not a doctor, and why can Joe Rogan advise you to get horse pills? Remember they called ivermectin horse pills. Now I don't know anything about ivermectin. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling anyone what medicine to take and what's the right medicine. And my belief about COVID and health and medicines continues to be that COVID proves science is broken. It didn't prove anything else to me. I don't know anything about the virus, the vaccines, any of it, right? I don't know anything about them. I gave up even trying to think about them a long time ago. I ignored it, right? I turned my attention onto my personal health, get lots of sun, eat well, exercise every day. I'll be okay, right? So I haven't managed my risks for COVID since March 2020, right? I've been, the risks have been irrelevant. I've caught COVID a bunch of times, but I get over it. So yesterday we had them both together, and Joe Rogan took umbrage with, he got criticized. He's not a doctor, and they both attacked the Bill Gates health cartel. And why is Bill Gates the guy who always gets credibility when we're talking about health? Joe Rogan's done this before, but it hits really well, right? So he says he's not a scientist, he's not a virologist, he's not a medical doctor, yet he was in this public health advocate on television telling everybody to go out and get medical intervention that he would profit from, which is wild, right? Now, I do have a respect for the capacity of Bill Gates, and I do have a feeling that he's not an evil person, right? I don't think he's evil, but he might be. I don't know. He might be. He still won't answer any questions about the Epstein thing, and 30-something times they talked about it yesterday as well. So who knows how captive he is? Who knows who his masters are? I see a desperate man who just wants to be loved and wants people to respect him and like him, and made a bunch of mistakes and isn't quite as clever when it comes to interpersonal relationships or social IQ than maybe he is when it comes to other things. And so, if Bill Gates says something, I'm going to pay attention and listen a little bit. But with health, I mean, look at him, right? I'm not a fat shamer at all. I think everyone has their own things they have to struggle with, and it's hard in the world that we live in. The grocery stores are some of the sickest drug dealing cartels out there, and it's a problem, right? It's really hard. So I'm not going to fat shame anyone, but I'm also not going to take any health advice from Bill Gates. And when I look at someone like Joe Rogan, who's the spitting image of fitness, it's much easier to take his advice on health because he's healthy. Right? I don't want sick people giving me advice, and Bill Gates looks sick, right? And Joe, definitely, this is true, right? And this is probably the worst indictment there is of Bill Gates. It's the wife, right? The wife and what she says about the Epstein stuff and the divorce. And if you remember, there was a documentary made a few years ago, Inside the Mind of Bill Gates, I think it was called. And it was all about nuclear energy in the end, right? It was all about what Bill Gates is up to, and it's all about nuclear energy. But you could see his wife and he are in the video a few times, and you could see she had zero. I mean, you could tell she just had no respect for him, and that was sort of eye-opening thing. What's going on with this Bill Gates guy, right? When you saw respect him on TV, like in a documentary to that extent with cameras, no respect for the guy, and she's continued to do that, especially when it comes with the Epstein. That it was one of the reasons why they split up. So you definitely in this attention to what the ex-wife says because she knows what. So I'd say that's a good thing. So talk about that. They talked about all of the troubles around health messaging, the censorship around it, everything to do with COVID. They had a long talk about vitamin D being one of the major things. The vitamin D thing, I'm a little logically not on board with because when you think about it like this, right? So the people who don't die of COVID have high levels of vitamin D intake. So you get Scandinavians who supplement vitamin D because they know they don't get enough sun. And then you get the people who indeed are suffering from COVID, dying, and they have low vitamin D. But aren't those just correlative to health and not health? Like if you're already an obese, unhealthy person, your vitamin D levels are going to be low, right? So I don't know if vitamin D itself is the thing. They talked about how it was, and curing COVID would be as simple as making sure everyone has vitamin D. Well, Scandinavians are real healthy, and they also supplement with vitamin D because they're really healthy. I don't know if it's the cure or if it's just a correlation. Now, it's natural that healthy people have high levels of vitamin D, unhealthy people have low levels of vitamin D. So, is it the vitamin D or is it that they're healthy or unhealthy? So I don't know. Again, I don't know. I don't do any experimentation on health, COVID. Don't know anything about it. But I'm not just going to buy a solution like, oh, take vitamin D. Well, what about all the really obese people who are already super unhealthy and have comorbidities? Is just like some vitamin D going to help them? I think it's everything else. I think it's the whole world that gets you outdoors in the first place to get the vitamin D that matters more than the vitamin D itself. But maybe I'm wrong, right? But nevertheless, understand. I never knew anything about vitamin D before COVID. I never thought about vitamin D in that way. Never in my whole life did I ever say, "Oh, vitamin D. We need some vitamin D." But now I understand it. I get out. You see me with the pictures that I load up as the thumbnail every morning. Right? I go and get my morning sun. I get the sunrise on my skin every day. I get that good red light. They say it gets a lot of vitamin D. I only started that in COVID. I've been doing it almost every day since COVID began. If you see that, that's one of the reasons why I came up with this whole sun is up thing, right? It's important. It's also the predictability of the sun coming up and the guarantees of it coming up and tying that to Bitcoin. But indeed, I've been getting up for sunrises for that amount of time for the vitamin D benefits, right? You get that good red light in the morning, and so it's great. So health, right? I think more people than ever are conscious of their health, thinking about their own responsibility when it comes to health, not just relying on authorities any longer, not relying on so-called smart people like Bill Gates. And that's a diminishing of that ratchet effect, right? That this is a new feedback loop into the system that we haven't seen before, and that has novel benefits for us. So immediately that aligns with the Bitcoiner vision of the world, right? Taking personal responsibility for your health, understanding health and diet are probably the two most important factors. Exercise, weightlifting, that's where the bro science around Bitcoin is so strong, right? The bros were right about everything, right? The bros have been right about everything for a long time now. Now, the next big change that we can mention comes from a new Twitter files. So, Matt Taibbi yesterday going on about the GEC, the Global Engagement Center. If you remember a few weeks back, Elon Musk highlighted this GEC as the most nefarious force in US censorship and US mind control, US propaganda, US psyops, all those things. And Twitter Files covered it in great detail yesterday. And Matt Taibbi talked a little bit where this came from. And it wasn't necessarily a premeditated exercise. But here's what he says, right? He says, the new Twitter Files is dropping. It's a little bit like the Hamilton 68 story from a month ago where they were just feeding Twitter names and they created a fake dashboard, which was supposed to be algorithmic and all this, but it wasn't. It was just a list of people they didn't like and they would share it. It was literally an Excel spreadsheet. So no tech involved at all. So what he says is examples of state-funded digital blacklisting campaigns run amok. So he goes on to talk about how domestic terrorism. So in 2015, 2016, during the brief forgotten period when Islamic terrorism was fading as a national obsession and a Trumpian domestic terrorism had not yet become one, Obama made a series of decisions that may prove devastating to his legacy. So the short version is he created this global engagement center, the one that Elon Musk discussed and the one that we were talking about on the show, to counter the messaging and diminish the influence of international terrorist organizations. This act got almost no press. And here's what he says, right? In the bigger picture, the lame duck president kickstarted the process of shifting the national security establishment's focus from counterterrorism to disinformation, whether by malfunction or design. This abrupt course of change of Washington's contracting supertanker would have dramatic consequences. And that's the point, the contracting supertanker. So when we're talking about the ratchet effect, when we're talking about no feedback and money, when we're talking about the fallacy, the logical fallacy of the fiat system without this feedback loop, the same thing that allows unhealthy people to tell you about health, warmongers to tell you about peace, people who would see you burn more coal tell you about environmentalism. The same feedback loop that creates these perverted actions began to take shape here. And he calls it the subcontracting supertanker, right? Which just means to have a bunch of money to throw at stupid things. And what he says is, in fact, it's the tale of how America's information warfare mechanism turned inward against threats in our own population, and how that might someday be remembered as the story of our time, with a collective panic over disinformation defining the generation in much the same way the Red Scare defined the culture of the 50s. And he goes on to talk about, I just want to show you the NGO stuff here that he goes into, just about how many people were involved and how many people were running. So in the end, the GEC, in this case, just to get into the details of the Twitter files, were finding just average Americans and saying, oh, they're Indian, they're nationalists, they're terrorists from this thing. And they'd be like, one of them was a Cuban lady who had come as a child to New Jersey and was only ever American and happened to be a MAGA supporter. So she became caught up in this, you're a Indian nationalist. And even Yoel Roth and Twitter pushed back on the GEC in this case. They said, you're just going after Americans. And the list just kept coming, though, right? The list just kept coming. And the whole mechanism ended up working. And this is what we've discovered now. And we've talked about this before, rhyming, right? So remember we talked about originally the earmarks of Russian disinformation, the 51 known liars who signed the Hunter Biden laptop. Here, the next logic that they used to apply the censorship activities was the things rhymed. They used the same language. Now, we talk about that on the show a lot, right? When we see talking points get disseminated and they get copied. We saw the Woody Harrelson one was a perfect example. Everyone putting anti-vax conspiracy into the headline Wednesday or Sunday morning by 7 a.m. after what he had said at 11:30 the night before. And that's just a real good example of how talking points get downloaded and disseminated across the media sphere. So what they're talking about here is that things would rhyme. They would be similar languages that were used in Russia and Trump. And we've talked about a lot how weirdly the human brain has a weakness, and that we really will believe rhymes. If something rhymes, it's more persuasive. I don't know why, right? If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. It was not true, right? But it rhymed, and it helped O.J. Simpson a heck of a lot, right? And I think that was solely responsible for O.J. Simpson's innocence. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. If you create rhymes, for some reason, humans find them persuasive. And so that's literally all they did here. They just created a bunch of rhymes, right? They even said it. Stengel didn't need to prove an actual link between Russia enough to imply it by placing stories about Russia near asserting Trump and Russia's ideas rhymed. And they shared rhetorical playbook that allowed folks this way and see this way. But in the end, you had, I just want to get his one quote here, the experts, right? About all these experts, because that's really the main takeaway that I had were these the failure of that so-called expert class and what it means going forward. So he brings up all kinds of ridiculous cases, and even in this case, the Twitter folks were talking about researchers, right? Laughing about how GEC said these are researchers, these are experts, and they said this is just a hobby for a lot of these people. They looked into it. They only had Medium blogs, right? They hadn't really done much in the way of really helping folks, really breaking things down for them. Well, maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't pick it. Anyway, the point is, this has had a. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Underneath America's love affair with anti-disinformation in the Trump years, which expressed itself in the seemingly instant construction of a sprawling complex of disinformation studies and labs at institutions like Harvard, Stanford, Clemson, UT, Pitt, William and Mary, the University of Washington, and other locations, lay a devastating secret. Most of these experts know nothing. Many have skill, if you can call mesmerizing dumb reporters a skill, but in the area of identifying true bad actors, few know more than the average person on the street. And that is the big, to me, revelation of the latest Twitter files and Twitter files in general, right? What you get is, again, this breaking of ratcheting, this breaking of the logical conclusion that we can get more authority into a one government, one system organization than ever before, right? It used to be that was always the case. Even everything you read now, if you look at it from the mainstream media's point of view, Ukraine war, energy, health, uh, media, their answer continues to be, we need a one world government. We need to consolidate power into one set of hands, and then we won't get that trouble anymore. This had very little pushback 10 years ago. After all we've seen now, the pushback against that exercise, against that reflex to create a one world government or a larger government or to consolidate more power and essential authority is getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And there's fewer and fewer and fewer people actually promoting it. And every single day, new assets or old assets that would be assets to this ratcheting, universities, for example, get burned in the change, right? Just get burnt. Like, who would take any of these things seriously anymore? I know already for years as a Bitcoiner, I've hired a bunch of people in this industry, right? Over time, I've had all kinds of opportunities to put really talented people into really good spots. Guess what I don't recruit for? People who spent any time at an Ivy League school, because my excuse was always, well, what were you doing? Like, you can't learn any of this stuff at school. You should have been doing it on your own. You should have been finding a way to get this stuff going, whether it was slinging coins and trading or learning about this or learning about that or building this or building that. What were you doing in school? You can't learn a thing about Bitcoin in school. There's nothing to be learned about Bitcoin in school. That's why events like Bitcoin 2023 are such a big deal, right? We take up the slack for colleges because they can't do it, right? I think of myself as a curriculum creator. right? And I'm a former teacher. I have a ton of experience in creating curricula, and kind of know what I'm doing. That's why I've been doing event programming for quite a while now and successfully. So we take up the slack for colleges. We take up the slack for universities because they can't keep up. So I would never hire anyone who went to the place that is useless. Never. I would never do that. But we're going to start to see that idea become more pervasive. We're going to start to see more people criticizing, well, what the heck did you go to Harvard for? Like, who cares? And your disinformation group at Harvard, scam, right? Universities have become so out of touch with what's actually going on in the real world that the real frontier of thought and new pioneering ideas are all on the internet. There is no even competition. Like, universities provide zero momentum for a better world. There's nothing happening there worthwhile any longer. Nothing. So this ratcheting, right, looks broken on every single level. It doesn't look like there's anything left to ratchet, right? It looks like the amount of things that we can even be discussing that would help Americans argue for greater government control is down to nothing. There is corruption. There's a ton of corruption that we have to continue to worry about, but how much can that really continue to affect? A lot. I mean, we don't have elections, right? We haven't had an election in America, a real election in quite a while. So that could be part of it, but I mean, I still think that eventually the top is going to blow. So there you go. I got to add one note though before we end for the day, and that is the following. I've been quoting War Clandestine for a little while. Noster is a new communications layer. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. I mean, everything is changing so quick in a really positive way. So again, if you just step back a bit, it doesn't look like this is going anywhere. They're not going to ratchet up anything, right? I continue to think of Bitcoin as more likely than ever before. Every day it becomes more likely. Every day it survives. Every day we're here. Every day we meet and do the show. It seems to me more probable that we're headed to a Bitcoin standard and fast. But I got to make one note here because I've been talking about this guy a lot, and it's kind of a correction on my end. I don't know. But you know, War Clandestine. So War Clandestine's main message has been that Russia and accused America of bioweapons manufacturing, which I think is in question. I think a lot of people do that, right? It's going on around the world. He made another particular argument that COVID, the Wuhan lab leak, actually started with Zelensky and Trump's impeachment and what was going on, and then the drug was taken, and he called it animal vectors and moved into Wuhan, released from Wuhan in order to pin it on China, even though it was American finance. Now, the American finance of what went on in Wuhan, I don't think is under question. I think Fauci, the NIH, and everything and its relationships with Wuhan definitely still part of the equation. It's the Hunter Biden Metabiota labs and what their involvement was, and everything that Russia attacking the Ukrainian American bioweapons lab, that whole angle. I'm not saying it's not true. All right. I'm not saying it's not true. But A.G. Huff, Dr. Andrew G. Huff, who I regularly quote on this show as well. So I quote Huff, who wrote the book Wuhan. I think I mentioned it on the show yesterday, maybe. So A.G. Huff, and he's got a movie deal, right? I talked about that. It was either yesterday or the day before. I talked about what a big deal it's going to be that there is now a movie and professional broadcasting quality that's going to go behind the origins of COVID and all that stuff. So it's based on his book. He was just on Tucker Carlson. Here's what he says. Are George Webb and War Clandestine opposition forces, OP4? He says, I think so. There is no evidence linking COVID to the Ukraine biolabs. None. I keep asking to see the evidence, and yet there has been no production of these documents. I co-wrote the CBEP proposals for the Ukraine labs at Hiko Health, competing against Metabiota with Dr. Koresh, and also reviewed the available Ukraine lab documents. Everything falls under normal biosurveillance. They are trying to spin the narrative to create confusion within the US. So I just want to bring that up. I just want to bring it up because I've quoted this guy. I've always put asterisks. Again, I don't know War Clandestine. I follow the money and I put what he has to say. I'm very interested in the Hunter Biden Metabiota case. I'm always interested in the weird coincidence of January 2020, where Trump was impeached for talking about what was going on in Ukraine, and then the virus came. I'm never going to stop wondering about that, right? But AG Huff, Dr. Andrew Huff, is a credible person. I don't know how credible War Clandestine is. I don't know who he is even. So I just want to say that I'm going to be scrutinizing what War Clandestine says a little more, and I believe now Andrew Huff is more credible, but I could change my mind. This is fog of war, and not a lot of us know what's going on. So I don't think I've ever expressly said I think War Clandestine's right. I've said if you follow the money, it looks legit, but I don't know. And AG Huff has come out here and said, not true. This guy's probably a disinformation specialist. So, in the spirit of us talking about disinformation, we have to make sure we're not welcoming it into this space. We can talk about it, but I think AG Huff has definitely poured some cold water on War Clandestine's narrative. And again, it's not. I don't believe it has anything to do with the Fauci part. I don't think it has anything to do with um, um, some of the messaging around COVID and the debates around where it came from. But I will say that tying it directly to Hunter Biden is a little on the nose. It's a little on the nose, right? And you got to be careful when things are on the nose, right? You got to be careful when things are on the nose. You got to be careful when things look too good or it's too easy to believe them, right? I want to believe Hunter Biden created COVID. Who doesn't? It's hilarious, right? Hilarious is not the right word, but it would be, it's like rhyming, right? It makes it easy to understand for people. And it's easy for me to be biased, narrative biased towards that. Just like narrative bias can affect us all. But just got to mention that this is the first time I've heard him criticized directly by another credible person, and I think it's important that you guys know that and that it's surfaced. Because I've even gone so far as to put his name in my description. I've quoted War Clandestine in the description, and I definitely don't want to be, without putting asterisks and caveats, quoting any fake news people that would provide you with disinformation, right? We are here to fight against psyops and disinformation and those kinds of things collectively as a group, right? That's I think the point of having these nice coffees in the morning together, that we can take a look at the news, try not to get bamboozled. Now, I'm not saying he's a bamboozler, but Andrew Huff is, and Andrew Huff uses his own name. And not that I'm one of these can't use your pseudonyms. I'm all for pseudonyms, of course. But in this case, I'd take the credibility of the person who's out there with his own name a little more. I think he does have a UN thing in the background, AG Huff. So, and war, like, that marble of the UN, the marble they have, and whenever people speak there. But I'm not sure if that's what's going on. I don't know anything, right, about who all of AG Huff's background. I think he's credible. War Clandestine says anyone from the UN in this case has already heard what's going on because the Russians and the Chinese have been complaining about it. But again, right, we're not here to support the CCP or Putin, right? We are here to say the best thing going forward is if the Chinese people and American people and Russian people understand they converge over Bitcoin, not their governments. And so we're not here to support any of these governments or their talking points at the UN at all. So if War Clandestine is going to cite as evidence the CCP at the UN, I've ignored the UN for 20 years now. I think they're the dumbest thing in the world. So there you go. All right, team. Enjoy your Friday. See you soon. See you tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. Peace. Oh, let me know how the audio went. I did a thing today. Any breakup stuff? Any before we go? How'd it come through? Let me know. Bitcoin cuts right through it. I'm gonna re-listen. Not bad. What were there skips and stuff like that? Best. Good day. Good day. Let me know if you heard any weird shit. I can't find it all the time when I go through. So sometimes people say, "Oh, it was bad today," and I was like, I listened to like 15 minutes of it after. I didn't hear shit, but it happens. Slight breakups, but good overall. Earlier there were breakups. Yeah. Okay. Yes, a few. Ah, fuck. All right. Well. Skips only when you wave your arms around. Yeah, I don't understand what that is. I mean, it makes no sense. It literally makes no sense. So I'll try a few new experiments. A little skippy, but better than before. Okay. Motherfuckers. All right. Peace.